It's Lily and the two Sophies.
Got an extra chair.
We do have an extra chair.
Boris Johnson was meant to be here this evening. We're just going to empty, leave the chair empty.
Hello. This is cosy.
How are you all doing?
Hello. Hi. Yeah, well, thank you.
Great. So we're here to talk about the media.
Yeah.
And the media's role in all of this, and the media's responsibility for shaping society, I guess. And Sophie, number one, we were just talking off stage about the fact that when you first started writing, a lot of people didn't want to talk about their politics, and now, in fact, they're all actively saying to you, would you mind putting this in about my politics? You know, why do you think that is?
It's interesting. So I interview celebrities for The Guardian and The Observer, and a lot of women's magazines like Elle and Vogue as well. And when I first started doing this job about 15 years ago, you either might get a celebrity who was willing to talk about their politics, but maybe their publicist would be like, oh, no, don't put that in. And you'd have to navigate that. Or you would get a quote from them, and then you'd take it to a sort of women's glossy mag like Elle, and they'd be like, oh, no, just keep in the bits about her relationship and the breakdown or whatever it is. We don't want to hear that stuff about, whatever politician was big at the time, Tony Blair. And that's now come on such a journey. Not only are the celebrities or artists... It's interesting because Lily feels that artists, I think, maybe could get more involved in politics, but that is happening already. I speak to people who are willing to talk about it. They are willing to say, oh my God, Donald Trump. And I think for American celebrities, who I also do quite a lot of Hollywood stars, there's quite a big risk to them in terms of slagging off Donald Trump in public because, there's a massive amount of people out there powering his engine, and there's a lot of sort of backlash they can get from that. But they are now willing to talk to me about it. British people will talk to me about it. They'll say something about Brexit. Lots of famous women actresses will talk about feminism, which used to be a word that people weren't as comfortable with. And even if I don't ask them, the editors will say to me, oh, did you get anything about like causes that she supports or things she's passionate about, beyond the acting?
But in some way, that's kind of become a new yardstick by which to measure women's worth as well.
And some of it's a bit phony as well. Some of it's like, oh, say that you care about the environment, because that's almost like another form of PR, whereas it used to be, oh, say that,
and also
you only wear L'Oreal makeup.
Yeah.
And I love rainforests.
Yeah. Some of it's a bit like, oh, have they got a thing? Tick the box, have they got an issue? But I do feel just... I probably wouldn't have done this job forever, interviewing celebrities, had it remained this kind of clean PR. Oh, I just love my work and everything's great. The fact they're now going, well, I did have this one director who tried to do this terrible thing to me and I want to talk about it. Or I do think Brexit's going to do this great thing or this terrible thing and here's why. It's so much more interesting as a journalist just to be able to have real conversations.
Sophie, in your line of work, do you feel, what do you write about predominantly?
Everything. I've been doing a bit more political stuff, a bit more kind of green stuff recently. I guess my biggest thing that I've done this year, just to kind of give people a picture of what I've done, is I helped a young woman tell the story of Jared O'Mara, the MP for Sheffield Hallam, previous MP for Sheffield Hallam. He's not standing anymore, and I helped bring to light her story that he had allegedly sexually harassed her, and as far as I'm aware, he's still under investigation for that, and that all kind of came about because of that news that I helped break. So I was pretty pleased to do that, but I think increasingly, a lot of my journalism is kind of fitting in where people are where editors are looking for stuff, and they are looking for increasingly political stuff, whether it's necessarily about parties or whether it's about the people who are kind of doing stuff to change the world a bit. It has kind of, in some respects, become a bit of a tick box exercise, but within those confines, now there is a space to discuss more issues like this.
And do you feel, it's interesting, so there's so much now. I was talking to my dad the other day and I said, did you watch the Prince Andrew thing? And he was like, well, I don't really need to watch the Prince Andrew thing because it's everywhere and it's all, and so I can kind of piece it together between the 5 different strands that I've got coming into me through the day. And I just wonder, kind of, almost a lot of journalism has become almost background noise, And how important do you feel it is for journalism to go out and really, or how much of a role can it have now, rather than just being, reactive? How much of a role can it have, taking the bull by the horns and actually, kind of shaping our cultural kind of landscape? Do you think?
I think that what you're saying about lots of different kind of threads of information, we have the biggest issue that the press has got. If we're willing to consider the press as the little guy in any situation, it's against the big tech companies. And if you cannot get a story if you haven't got a way of monetizing your press empire, company, outlet, whatever, if you haven't got a way of monetizing it with like outside of Facebook, outside of Instagram, outside of Twitter, it's mainly Facebook has become such a huge source of news, then you're in a lot of trouble. And I think there are a lot of kind of new media outlets that aren't necessarily able to work ethically and work productively because they are just trying to chase hits, because they have to compete with the kind of success rates that you can get from perfecting however you post things on Facebook or whichever social media. So that's quite a tricky one. And then also you're dealing with an audience who are seeing things from every single which way, and there will be stories that can be debunked very, very quickly, or stories that don't necessarily get the full details aren't necessarily there. I know a load of people who loads of people watched the Prince Andrew documentary. I think it got over 1 million viewers, and it was an incredible interview. The documentary on the Channel 4 Dispatches one was really, really good as well. But a lot of people, there were a lot of details that people did seem to miss, even though they watched the entire thing, because I think they were just on their phone throughout, texting people, being like, "Oh my God, what is this?" I'd strongly advise watching that with pause on and just taking time to gasp and ask all the questions and then carry on playing.
One thing that makes me laugh at the moment is that quite often on Facebook, and I'm on all these social media things all day long, as well as
on TikTok.
Do you know, I've got an 8-year-old. Sadly, I let her go on TikTok and she's never coming back. That was my first mistake. And one thing I noticed is on Twitter or Facebook, you'll get a post, a sort of meme that does the rounds that loads of people I know will retweet. Not so much journalists I know, but sort of friends who I went to school with up north and other people from other parts of my life who aren't journalists. So fair enough, it's not their specialist area, whereas it is mine. They will repost something saying, here's what the media don't want you to know about it, or here's this amazing, young guy in Africa who's invented this new kind of wind-powered thing. The media don't want you to tell you about him. You'll click on the link. Firstly, it'll be like a screen grab, an article from the Times or from the BBC News homepage about this kid or about this thing the media aren't telling you. It will literally be screen grabbed from the media, as if the media was this one great thing, whereas actually like The Guardian and like the Morning Star and the BBC and CNN and Fox News are all quite different things. And then, it will turn out that this news topic has been covered in like various national papers, various TV programs, but it's being reposted by people who only get their media from something that isn't technically the media. Facebook isn't technically the media. It's a sort of self-publishing site. It's not meant to be generating its own content. So whenever I say to any of these people, and everyone now hates me, whenever I write on these threads, I always go, yeah, right, oh, we need to hear about this. I always go, has anyone on this thread bought a newspaper this week? Nobody has ever bought a newspaper this week. I say, do you pay for Netflix? Yes. But do you pay for any of this other stuff? No. How do you know this stuff isn't in the papers? You're all saying the papers don't write about this. None of you are buying the papers. And you might be clicking on a link to a Guardian article from Facebook, but you're never going to therefore, once you've clicked on an interesting celebrity story, you're not going to read about something happening in Pakistan as well whilst you're browsing through Facebook. You're not going to get some really decent stuff from a war zone. And you're then telling me, you journalists, you don't cover it. We cover it. You're not buying it. So that's how I currently piss off everyone I used to be friends with. And can I say one thing that annoys me is that I do some guest lecturing at journalism postgrad courses, places like City, which is a great, has a great cause. I mean, you can go at any age, but typically you might get a recent graduate there, so you might get people sort of age 21, 22, training as journalists. You can choose which section you do it. So you can choose the print media section, or you could specialise in radio or TV. And I will literally sit in a room full of 21-year-olds who want to work in newspapers and ask them if they buy newspapers, and they don't. And I say, how do you think your industry is going to survive if you would never dream of paying an online subscription to the Times or buying the FT?
And do you think it is going to survive? Because at one point, the Guardian very definitely felt like it was a sinking ship, and then seemingly...
they've turned it around amazingly.
Yeah, it feels like it's...
Yeah, Kath Finer, the editor, I'm sure it's lots of people's works as well as Kath, but she, at first, when I saw, that begging letter at the end, sort of every so often, if you've maybe clicked on 3 Guardian articles, you get the begging letter at the end saying, would you think about funding us? And when I first saw it, I was like, it's just really embarrassing. It's like that Wikipedia thing. But I give money to that Wikipedia thing because I use it all the time. And the Guardian have made it work through the begging letter, so good on it,
Right, okay.
Whatever works. But I'm not anti-paywalls. When you put a link to a Times article and people go, I wanted to read that, Sophie. Fucking paywall. I'm not giving my money. I'm like, well, it is Murdoch at the top of it, but it's actually a normal journalist who wrote that story, and, there has to be some funding of it. Like, newspapers didn't used to be free.
The Telegraph one's a bit harder to get past, though, isn't it?
Barclay Brothers,
it's a bit tricky, isn't it? Yeah, with the...
This is the real problem with the media.
The Telegraph aside,
the real problem with the media, and I'm sure Lily will be very good at this, is that so many of our newspapers that I'm begging you all to buy are unfortunately owned by particular barons. You've got the Barclay Brothers who are trying to sell the Telegraph at present. Murdoch does own the Times and 80 other titles around the world. The Guardian, for all its sins, and I'm not someone who constantly praises the Guardian, is a bit more neutrally owned. It's a sort of charitable trust, the Scott Trust at the top of it. Of course, there are still human beings with choices and biases and decisions in there, but it's not somebody who has a massive agenda. For example, when the Iraq war was going to happen and Blair and Bush were talking about going in, Murdoch owned 80 titles, print titles around that. He's shed a few since then, but he owned 80 print titles. Some of them were very big titles, such as, the British Times. Some of them were sort of local papers in Australia, not so globally well known. But on the day when there was a big deciding, I don't know if it was a vote, but there was a big parliamentary thing being cast. It was like do or die. Are we going into Iraq? And it was America and Britain at this point. All 80 of Rupert Murdoch's titles around the world, all of them had a front page saying yes. Well, something's up. Something's really, really up when 80 newspapers all say the same thing. So I'm a massive defender of journalism, but I also you do have to look at ownership.
Lily.
She's good on that.
You've always had an interesting relationship with the press.
Really? I quite like the paywall. Today, Julie Birchall did a big takedown of me in the Telegraph, and I couldn't read it.
I'm afraid...
I got 5 lines in, I was like, damn.
Things I could tell you about Julie Birchall.
So what was the question?
Well,
Sorry.
I don't know, really. I mean, how do you feel about the media? Where do you think it's going? Is it a race to the bottom? Is it just... Are we kind of going into the age of clickbait? And, what is its role moving forward?
I don't know. I mean, my sort of theories on it change all the time. I mean, I think, as you mentioned, I do have sort of run-ins with the media, especially the tabloid media, and particularly the Mail and the Sun. But the way I make peace with it is that, and this is probably like half my therapist talking and not really real, but I feel like, especially where women are concerned, is that the tabloids sort of serve, they're really good at making an example out of all women, and there being a sort of narrative where all women are concerned, and that sort of leads into women's vulnerability in the world, and I definitely think that a lot of the time they're not really attacking me, they're just attacking a young woman who has a voice, who wants to express that opinion, and she should be put back in her box. It's not necessarily about what my opinion is.
It's nothing personal.
Well, sometimes it is, but more I like to tell myself more often than not it's not. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess, like, you know, whenever I look at the Mail online, I always look at that sidebar of shame, and it feels like whenever it's a woman that's being talked about, no matter what situation she's in, she's flaunting, or she's showing off, or she's, you know, bragging about something, usually the way that she looks, or she's, you know, she's flaunting her curves or her lithe limbs or whatever. And I feel like that's... it's not true. You know, most of these women are just walking outside.
There she is, flaunting it again.
But I mean, seriously, the next time you go on the Mail online, look for it, because you'll see that men just walk. They are just about in the world. They're with their son. They're just playing in the playground with they're not flaunting their curves while they're in the playground playing with their child. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like it creates this it creates a narrative when we're talking about what those people represent in the world in a bigger sense, rather than those people as individuals. And I guess where it ends up is, you know, I saw Sophie covering that story about that girl.
The Grace Malone
yes,
murder.
in New Zealand earlier on this week. And the media reporting on that was just like unfathomable, I think, because I read it before I'd read about your commentary on it, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, I know about this case. This guy murdered this woman and put her in a suitcase and went out on another date and then got rid of her body. And the way that they'd presented it on the BBC website or somewhere else was that... Well, Sophie, you can say.
Basically, I think with court reporting, so in this case, a lot of people were writing about it. You have to be so careful about the way our courts work, and actually this is a big problem that feeds back into politics at the moment. This case was in New Zealand, but I think there have been a lot of cases in the UK at the moment which take so long to take to court, which means that there's an impact on reporting restrictions. And basically, when something's sub judice, or is that the Latin for it? Yeah. Okay. Sophie's very good at languages.
It becomes contempt of court if it's an ongoing process.
Exactly. So you have to be really careful about how you report things. Yeah.
But this one was, they said, the headlines were she was into rough sex, and as Lily's just said, like, firstly, he's done what to her body? He's got a dead person on his hands. Initially quite suspicious, then he's gone on a date. What the hell is happening here? You know,
they were accurate. The thing is, they were accurately reporting his defence. So in his defence, he did make up a load of shit, and he could have made up a load of shit. And rather than reporting it to say, you know, she was into BDSM, he claims, they didn't have the he claims, they didn't have the accused claims at the end. So it looked as if, and I think there's a lot of problems with media literacy, but I also think it's incumbent on somewhere like the BBC to not let bias write those headlines and to think, okay, who's the source? Who is actually saying this? And I think fundamentally the biggest issue with our media and our understanding of media is about the source. Who is saying it? Because when you work out who is saying it, you work out why they're saying it and what their motivation is.
But also, who is it appealing to? Is it appealing to sort of the male gaze or female readers? Because I understand as a journalist, I don't totally hate clickbait, because I do want the media to survive and I do want people to click on things that I write. But I would have probably clicked on a link that said, man puts body in suitcase and goes on date. Like, I would have clicked on that. That's already dark, grimly interesting enough. You don't have to put, she was into rough sex. Like, there is a whole other way of telling.
But I also think the BBC, they're not guided by clicks. They're not guided by kind of like KPIs. So I've heard of a very popular youth brand, which I won't say the name of, because they have now required their writers to set themselves these kind of targets of how many hits they're meant to get per week. And if they don't get that number of hits per week, they cannot get the long-awaited price pay rise that they deserve otherwise. And that is unfortunate, but also that's where we are guided by readers. We will follow more than ever what readers want. And in the same way that lots of nasty, horrible tabloids used to say, well, we're only going to print what the readers want. And now, even more so, publications can really accurately get what people want, because we know what people are clicking on, and they say they want to click on the stuff about, really worthy issues, which I can't even think of off the top of my head.
But they don't.
But they don't. They want to see the celebrities, which kind of brings us back nicely to the point that when celebrities, for example, Lily talking about refugees, when celebrities talk about that stuff, it kind of tips things back, and it pulls these issues back into the limelight, which is a wonderful thing to do.
I mean, I would say on that, like, just because I have a relationship with both sides of the press. I have this sort of like relationship with the tabloids, and then I have relationships with the sort of broadsheets to a certain extent. And it's definitely publications like The Guardian or The Telegraph or The Times that would pick up on something like, me working with Help Refugees, or when I had my stalker and I did a thing with. What's that political party? Women's Equality Party. They'll pick up on that, but the Daily Mail and the Sun won't write about those things because it doesn't work for their narrative for me to be seen as a victim, because they don't want people to think of Lily the Loudmouth as being somebody who's been a victim of something horrific. They want to think of me as being this loudmouth that we can make and humiliate and make a scene out of when there's an election on, for instance.
Very quickly, ladies, because we're being wrapped up. How can we make the press more accountable or hold them more accountable?
That is a good question. I mean, the Leveson inquiry brought up a lot of questions in that area, and it led to lots of discussions about, tighter controls on the press. But all that Leveson really brought up was that existing laws were being broken. It brought up lots of rule breaking. It didn't bring up the fact that you can tap people's phones and you can chase people down the street with, aggressive paparazzi. It proved that rules were being broken. So I've been a bit wary in the past few years of the idea of tighter press controls, because that can always come with quite a political agenda behind it, which might serve somebody's purpose and not another's. And actually the libel laws in this country are some of the strictest in the world. It can be quite hard for investigative journalism in this country to bring people down, because it's very
Philip
easy.
Green, sorry to interrupt,
But no, carry on.
No, I'm just saying Philip Green, the only way he was named was because Lord Hayne.
Sorry. So knee-jerk reaction happens every time.
Should I have said Sir Philip Green? Sir Philip Green. Sir Philip Green. No, it was only because Lord Hayne actually named him using parliamentary privilege, which really is the most privileged form of platform you can possibly get. Anyway,
Yeah, so if lots of investigative journalists would have liked to do lots of stuff on Philip Green sooner, but he has, the most expensive lawyers, and he can shut things down quite easily. And because his name was mentioned in Parliament as being accused in various things, then the press were allowed to report his name because they were reporting on Parliament rather than reporting on their own sort of lead. I'm all for more freedom of the press, actually, which might slightly go against what Lily's... It sounds like it goes against what Lily's saying. Obviously, I'm not for, young female celebrities being totally abused.
No, it's not. Can I just say, it's not.
I know you're not
really about
yourself,
for me. It's not really about celebrities. What I'm sort of saying is that when somebody comes forward and they report an assault or something, and they end up at a police station, this narrative filters down into everyday life, and it's easier for a policeman or somebody taking down that statement to put this woman as somebody who shows off, who shouldn't have been wearing that short skirt, if the way that women are presented the whole time is flaunting or showing off, or being
the next thing you know, she's in a suitcase, and it's because she likes rough sex.
Yeah, and that's my point. Really, it's nothing to do with me and celebrities.
Yeah.
I'm not saying feel sorry for us.
No, I know you're not, and you don't.
No, but it trickles down, doesn't it?
I just think those are two issues. One is how are we going to legally counteract misogyny, and that's a whole sort of historic entrenched attitude that I think is wrongly believed to sell papers. I think more women, it wouldn't totally solve the problem. I mean, there are women vaguely high up at the Mail, not totally at the top of it, but I do think more women in positions of power always helps these things. Not always, but 80% of the time.
There you go, that'll do.
I think we need to have better good guys and kind of worse bad guys. I think having Lily Allen as being the bad guy in on the Mail Online, it's they've got better bad guys to chase, and they should be chasing. There are people they should be chasing who are kind of in a position where they will be punched up against rather than punching down. And I think to get those bad guys, you need better kind of... Not necessarily better journalists, because some of the most effective journalists are quite horrible people, but I think people who can really, who know which way to go, who know which way to punch up and punch down. I mean, there's, I was looking into there's a Brexit Party candidate who has said she supports all freedom of movement. Which kind of I don't think really agrees with the Brexit Party. And I was like, let's out her, let's do something. And my colleagues at a paper were just like, this doesn't really seem worth it. It's just punching down. And I think it's really good to have those people putting that block in place and going, is it really worth, writing 500 words on, whether Lily
You mean
Allen's
she's just some
crying over
clueless person who's not really...
It's just an idiot in the Brexit
Well,
party.
exactly.
Who knew?
It's just
anyone was able to sign up for
it,
Brexit
sorry,
party,
not
weren't
to...
they?
I just think we need to... A lot needs to happen in order to get better, more kind of diverse and representative journalists into journalism. And I think that there's a wonderful scheme called Diversify the Media, and I think that we need to think a lot more ambitiously about who the bad guys are and how they can be taken down, and actually go, you know what, if you've got and if anyone here has got a great story, please do email, because I'm looking at some, like, I'm pitching at the moment, I'm looking for great tips, and I think there are some really bad people that can be brought down, and they will make a bigger story than whatever Lily's up to.
Sophie, Lily, thank you very much. I'm afraid
Thank you,
that's
George.
it. Give them a big round of applause. Thank you.